Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into a really fascinating collision of human psychology, high-stakes history, and the completely invisible systems designed to keep us alive. We're actually going to travel back to one specific year, 1987, to contrast two very different types of emergencies. One literally stopped the entire nation in its tracks, while the other, well, it happened completely in the shadows, yet it fundamentally changed the way we handle life and death.
So think about this for a second. What could a toddler trapped in a Texas well possibly have in common with a dense, bureaucratic evaluation of 911 dispatchers? On the surface, absolutely nothing, right? But as we unpack the source material today, you'll see how these two distinct threads from 1987 perfectly illustrate the tension between our total obsession with dramatic, singular rescues and the unsung, data-driven systems that actually safeguard the masses.
All right, let's jump straight into Section 1, the rescue that changed news. Let's start with an event you probably know, or at least kind of remember, the incredible saga of baby Jessica. Picture this. It's October 14th, 1987, down in Midland, Texas. Little 18-month-old Jessica McClure falls 22 feet down an insanely narrow 8-inch wide well casing right in her aunt's backyard. What followed was a totally harrowing 58-hour ordeal. Rescuers tried everything. They brought in mining engineers and used this relatively new water jet cutting technology to slice through the solid rock, digging a parallel shaft and a cross tunnel. And during all of this, rescuers could literally hear this toddler singing Winnie the Pooh from deep underground. It's just wild. Finally, a paramedic named Robert O'Donnell inched his way into that tight tunnel and pulled her to safety. It was raw, pulse-pounding, high-visibility heroism.
This whole thing brilliantly illustrates how one singular emergency can just hijack a culture. I mean, this effectively birthed modern 24/7 live TV news coverage. The big three networks literally abandoned their primetime programming. ABC with Ted Koppel interrupted the sitcom I Married Dora. CBS's Dan Rather cut into Beauty and the Beast. NBC's Connie Chung broke right into Rags to Riches. Get this, over in Minnesota, a massive Jumbotron announcement about her rescue actually paused a college football game, and the stadium just went wild. The entire country was completely locked in.
Moving right along to Section 2, the power of one victim. So you gotta wonder, why did this one event stop the world? Well, to answer that, we really need to look at the psychology behind our empathy. Then President Ronald Reagan hit the nail on the head when he said, everybody in America became godmothers and godfathers of Jessica while this was going on. It was this incredibly intense, personalized, emotional connection. She wasn't some abstract statistic. She was a face, a name, a literal child singing in the dark.
This intense emotional connection actually boils down to a concept defined by Carnegie Mellon University called the identifiable victim effect. Basically, it's a psychological phenomenon where we feel much stronger empathy and are way more likely to help out a specific, identifiable victim, rather than a large, anonymous group dealing with a systemic issue. We're simply hardwired as humans to care about that individual narrative.
And you can see this effect immortalized in our media all the time. Scott Shaw's famous photograph of baby Jessica being pulled from the well, that won the 1988 Pulitzer Prize. As historical sources note, Pulitzer juries are frequently drawn to these exact types of singular emotional moments. Think about Nat Fine capturing Babe Ruth's frail final bow back in 1949, or Rocco Moribida catching an electrical lineman giving his coworker the kiss of life in 1967, or Monetta Sleet Jr. capturing the deep sorrow of Coretta Scott King at her husband's funeral. These highly visible snapshots capture our empathy perfectly. Let's turn now to Section 3, Behind the Cameras, EMS Systems. Here's where we have to make a pretty hard pivot, because while all the cameras were pointed at that well in Texas, a completely different type of emergency was unfolding quietly in the shadows. There is a very stark contrast at play here. On one side, you have the identifiable victim, highly visible, emotional, singular, driving a massive media frenzy. But on the other side, you have the systemic patient. This patient is completely invisible to the media. They're basically just data, swept up in the thousands of anonymous 911 calls made every single day.
Let's look at a systemic tragedy that happened in that exact same year, 1987, within the Los Angeles Fire Department. This is a failure that didn't have news anchors covering it, but it forced a total revolution in how we handle medical emergencies.
As detailed in a National Fire Academy research project, in 1987, family members made 3 separate 911 calls for a 42-year-old woman named Zipporah Lamb. She was complaining of chest problems and feeling faint. But the dispatchers, well, they completely failed to ask basic medical questions. In fact, they refused to send an ambulance twice.
By the time paramedics finally arrived nearly half an hour later, she was in cardiac arrest, and tragically, she died. This highly publicized system failure forced the LAFD to wake up and finally bring in a medical priority dispatch system. That meant scripted questions and a formal quality assurance and quality improvement program, or QA/QI, designed to make sure a heartbreaking oversight like this would actually be caught and corrected.
Which brings us to Section 4, Measuring Success with Data.
Now, implementing a system and actually making it work, those are two entirely different beasts. Saving lives on a systemic level means shifting away from those emotional stories and emotional photography and diving deep into objective, rigorous data tracking. Internal audits drawn straight from LAFD records in early 1999 reveal a pretty terrifying reality: massive, systemic noncompliance. Basically, what these audits showed was an unacceptably high rate of deviations from established field protocols. Paramedics were administering medications outside of protocol, failing to contact base hospitals, and improperly documenting when people refused transport. This kind of systemic breakdown exposed the whole city to enormous liability, and it severely eroded the medical community's confidence in the department.
And fixing a massive system like that is incredibly tough. 13 years after the Zapata Lamb tragedy, a September 2000 headline in the Los Angeles Times literally read, "Fire Department Dispatching in Dire Need of Revision." Think about that. Internal audits were showing that Los Angeles dispatchers were still failing to ask the key scripted questions 48% of the time. It just goes to show that systemic change, unlike a quick, singular rescue, is painfully slow and notoriously difficult.
Let's dive into Section 5, the accreditation standard.
So, how do you actually fix a massive failing system? Well, you turn to the unsung heroes of the medical world. To build real accountability, the medical world leans heavily on rigorous, self-assessed frameworks. We're talking about groups like the Commission on Fire Accreditation International or the Commission on Accreditation of Ambulance Services. These frameworks force an agency to evaluate absolutely everything: governance, strategic planning, information and analysis, human resources, the whole shebang. It's an exhaustive top-to-bottom audit by a third party just to enforce a standard of care. And this brings us to the pretty grueling reality of systemic change. Getting accredited? It's not a quick fix. Integration takes years of intense self-assessment. It eats up a ton of funding and staff time. Plus, according to change management models, it really demands a powerful guiding coalition to prevent everyone from just getting complacent. But most importantly, it is a deliberate uphill battle against that identifiable victim bias we talked about earlier. These frameworks force agencies to prioritize the invisible masses, making sure the anonymous caller gets the exact same standard of care every single time.
I want to leave you with this final, provocative thought. The year 1987 showed us the undeniable emotional power of one visible victim trapped in a well, but it also exposed the fatal flaws of a completely broken dispatch system. When the cameras are finally turned off and the news anchors go home, what truly keeps you safe? Is it the dramatic, televised heroism of a singular rescue, or is it the invisible, grueling, rigorous standards of continuous quality improvement operating behind the scenes? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I really hope this changes how you view the incredible, invisible systems working every single day to protect us all.